Welcome to the Dead Prophet. I'm your host, Mike Beckett. We're here, talking about where biblical worldview and real life collide, and it is an honor to have a former college mate and friend, Dorsey Ross, on our show. It's been a couple years since we've seen each other, a couple, and you've got an amazing story to tell. Obviously, you were born with Apert syndrome. You were a surprise, I guess, as well. And you know, looking at what the odds were, the doctors and teachers and people in your life when you were younger, pretty much said, "Don't expect much. You're not going to go anywhere. You just this is it." But God had different plans, and it's amazing to see what God can do when everybody else says, you can't do that. You've written a book, you've graduated college, you're in ministry, sharing your testimony and story. So it is an honor to have you on the show today. And we're just going to jump right in and get started on this. I find it interesting that, when we look at society has their own perspective on, how a particular person may turn out. You just kind of, you go off of face value, and I sometimes do that too. I'm finishing up my book, Christianity at a Crossroads, which will be out by the time this show airs. But one of the things in the last chapter, if we go through and talk about the cultures of Rome and the culture in America today, I just start kind of being real in that last chapter and talk about, there are times even we as Christians get into this mindset of prejudgmental. Part-time, I kind of help a friend out at one of the local mini marts, and we get groups of people that come in, and you kind of, they're stereotyped, by whatever it might be, low life, or they're just a bunch of losers. And you kind of get into that, even as a believer, you get into that symptom, like these people come in, there's no evidence of wanting to change. They just kind of, this is what they look like. So there's not going to be any hope for them. And we allow ourselves to be critical and judgmental, and definitely not like Christ. And there are times in my life I have defaulted to that. But when you look at it, when society as a whole kind of pre-gives what they think is going to be the case for you, like either you're never going to achieve education, or you've just always failed your classes, so you're not going to amount to much, or your parents were this, so you're going to just be, we kind of put these stereotypes, and very stereotypical, and not only do we do it in society, but we've allowed that to infiltrate within our churches today. And I think in reality, if we were to be honest with ourselves as believers and as ministers within churches, we would kind of stop and say, hey, maybe we're not able to reach as many people as we'd like to, because we have these preconceived prejudices, or that are nothing more than maybe just our own self-righteousness that we look through the lens of the world with. And I know, like myself, I find myself doing that often and having to stop myself, but you have overcome quite a few things that people have said you would never do. They said you'd never go to college, you'd never go beyond that, and your life is a testimony of what God can do when other people say it can't be done. So go ahead, and I'd like you to just share with us your story today.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. My name is Dorsey Ross, and I was originally from New York. I was born and raised in New York. I now live in Westchester, PA. And, I'm 47 years old. I was born on January 16th, 1977. My parents were 41. My mom was 41. My dad was 45 at the time that they had me. And my mom, was even surprised, even learning at that age, 4 or 5 months into the pregnancy, learning that she was pregnant, she started to, gain weight and, get the belly bump that most women do. And she's like, something's, not right here. Let's go and get it looked at. And honestly, she thought she had some type of tumor growing inside of her. And the doctor said, well, thankfully, it's not a tumor, but you do have a baby growing inside of you.
It's funny that generation, because I know there's a few other people from that generation. They just were like, I don't know how I could have gotten pregnant at 41 years old or at 39 years old. And you sit to yourself and you think, wait a second here, you know. But that generation kind of, because I know, like, I have family who have heard that generation, and they had like children in their late 30s, early 40s, and I don't know how this happened. So I kind of find that funny a little bit. But anyway, go ahead.
And then, so and back then, like you said, back then that generation and that medical, medical portion of it, they didn't have the testing like they do today to determine, hey, is the baby going to be healthy? What is where is the block of the baby growing inside the mother's, a mother's womb? And they didn't really know until I was born that I was going to have any type of disability, any type of birth defect.
Mhm.
And so when I was born, my forehead was pushed outward, my eyes and nose were pushed back into my head, and my fingers and toes were fused together. Me had no individual movement of them. And my skull, usually when you're born, most people are born with a soft spot or a small skull opening to allow the brain to grow and allow the brain to, the skull and the brain to grow normally. And I didn't have that. And, when the doctor came back into the room and to explain to my parents what was happening, they said, well, due to the fact that he had no skull opening and all the other, issues that he has, we don't think he'll survive. We don't think he'll make it. And we think that the best option that we can give to you is to sign the paper over and to put him into a institution. And thankfully, my parents were both, saved and both knew and trusted in God and said, well, we can't do that. We'll do whatever, we'll go, on this path and whatever happens, happens basically. And there was a nurse in the hospital, whether my nurse or somehow, knew about my condition. And she said to my parents, that there's a doctor at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital in New York City, in the Bronx, New York City area, that are doing operations on babies, like your son. Why don't you take him there and see what they can tell you? And they did, and they said, the doctors there even said, well, we can operate, we can, basically make a hole in his skull and relieve the pressure on his brain, and but after probably basically after that, we don't know what's gonna happen,
Mhm.
and so they did. I had my first mini operation at 6 weeks of age to open the skull to allow my brain to grow and allow it to function normally. And after that, they weren't doing all the facial operations that I had. They were doing mainly the fingers and to separate the fingers. So I went to NYU Medical Center to do all the, reconstruction of the face and to do those operations and to separate my hand. I went back to Columbia Presbyterian up to about the age of 15. I had about over my lifetime, I had 68 operations, but up until about 16 was all the major operations, and I was probably about 60 at the time,
Wow.
65.
Wow. That's a lot to
Yeah,
to to go through and handle as a young teen. How was when you started getting to the age of school? Did you go to public school? Did you go to private school? What was that experience like? How were kids back in the? I mean, I was born in '75, so we're not too far apart from each other as far as age. And I know a lot of what I went through when I was a kid, just being uh, a child would be considered bullying today
Yeah,
and other things. But what was that experience like for you? How did you kind of adapt and when did the whole idea of well, we'll talk about that first, and then I'll come back to the
right.
second question.
Okay. I went from 5 years old when I in kindergarten, even pre-K probably, up until I graduated high school. I went to a special school for people with disability or special needs
Hmm.
called the called the Henry Viscardi School in Long Island
Hmm.
or on Long Island. And special education, never went to public school. And it wasn't until obviously it wasn't until I got older, like you had said, that about the bullying.
Hmm.
And even, you would think, kids with other special needs and other disabilities, they wouldn't bully other kids with special needs
Right.
and
Yeah.
disabilities,
Yeah.
but they still did. And not just me. They bullied, others as well. They would, call me names and, pick on me and, whatnot. And even on the outside world as well, I would have people point and stare and, call me monster and freak and everything. And um even as I got older, even into my adult years, have people say names and, look at me and stare at me and wonder, probably in my own head, I'm thinking, they're probably wondering, and maybe they weren't even thinking that, but I'm thinking because of my past and because what I had to deal with,
Hmm.
they're probably thinking, why does he look like that?
Hmm.
What you know what did he go through to look like that? Was he, in a fire? Was he in a car accident? All these different things that I've had people ask me, you know, were you in the car accident? Were you, in the fire? I had to tell them, explain to them, no, I was born like this, and go back and explain to them this is what, happened.
Hmm. Wow. The when now obviously you said your parents were believers, so they
Right,
made the choice to not sign you away to the
right.
state, which was great. How did how did their nurturing with you with this, how did that instill into you the idea? I mean, you probably at some point in your obviously life obviously have committed your life to Christ, but at some point I'm sure you've probably said, God, why me?
Oh
How
yeah,
did your parents kind of help nurture that? Because that's a lot to take in, when you're younger and you're learning about God and how he loves everybody, but then we're all different and you're thinking to yourself, well, God, if you love me, why did you let this happen to me?
right.
How did that all play into effect?
Yeah, and like you said, I did give my life to Christ at the age of 13. I grew up in the church at, near my house where I lived in New York, and the people in the church were very accepting, very caring. When I started going to the youth group, the youth, would love on me and care for me, and and I think the fact, to answer your question, I think I'm still personally, I think I'm still answering that question.
Hmm.
Why me?
Yeah.
What obviously I've learned, and I think it's all of us. Sometimes we know what God has for us and what God's plan is for us, and then there's times in our life where we go through a season, and I think that's part of the season I'm going through right now is, okay, God, what's next?
Yeah.
What do you have in store for me next in the next season of my life? But during my teenage years, I think, ask it, question, God, why would you allow me to be born this way? Why would you, what did I, maybe what did I do, or what, why did you choose me to be born this way? And then I started to, obviously I started to read the Bible, and Psalm 139, I think, points it out perfectly that He created us inside our mother's womb. And I don't think it purposefully that, He makes people with disabilities. I think it's just the fact that we live in a fallen world,
Mm-hmm.
and things happen. Science happens that this cell didn't combine with this cell correctly,
Mm-hmm.
and unfortunately things happen in in pregnancy, and then in a mother's womb, or even after birth. Things happen, and things don't align correctly.
Yeah.
And I started to realize, even recently I was talking to the kids in the youth group that I help out at, that in Ephesians 2:10, that God calls us His masterpiece. He calls us His workmanship. He sees us as that He makes us into His masterpiece, and He writes us out as a poem each and every day of our life. He's writing out the poem that He has for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What was the what was the thing that really helped you kind of press forward? And I'm sure you go through it now, because I mean there's times in my life where I sit back and I think, man, God, I don't get this. I really am I'm dumbfounded. I don't know what in the world you're trying to do. Um, help me with this. But what was the thing that helped you just keep going each and every day to know? I mean, I think you summed it up great. Masterpiece, workmanship. God creates every one of us as His piece of art that He gets to display beautifully in this world, and we give Him glory for that. But what was it that helped you keep going?
I think part of it is definitely my parents.
Okay.
My parents growing up, my parents never treated me as someone with a disability. They never held me back from doing something that I wanted to do. I I was on a growing up, I was on a baseball league for people with disabilities. I was in a bowling league for people with disabilities. Even as an adult, I was on a bowling league for for regular, quote unquote, normal everyday people.
Hmm.
And I would, even with my shortened arms, because I can't lift my hands above my head, if I wanted to do, the rock climbing walk that you see sometimes in these amusement parks, I would do that, and they would say, if you want to do it, go ahead, go ahead and do it.
Hmm.
And I think that's part of the reason why I kept going, was because my parents allowed me to, at times figure out for myself what I could and could not do, and couldn't wasn't very much. And I think one of my life changes, can't is not in my vocabulary.
Yeah. And
You know,
that's a great mindset to have. It's funny, our we'll say something to our son. He's 15. My wife has this thing. She'll say, well, can't never did anything. Uh, well, I can't do that. Well, can't never did anything. You can do this. You will, especially if it's chores, you will do
right.
this. you know, it's this idea that we allow the influences of our self-doubt to permeate what we think and how we think. I think that is amazing because when you look at society today, one of the things that seems to be missing from our society is parents interaction. Parents are always overly protective. They're not willing to allow their child to learn and to develop on their own as to what they can and can't do. You obviously went and graduated school. You went to a community college, and then I met you when you came to University of Valley Forge, and we were students, and you were just going to school to be a youth pastor, and I'm sure that when you sit back and you think about it, you're thinking, okay, well, these people in my special education school said, well, this is really all you just plan on getting a job at Wendy's or plan on getting a job at McDonald's. Don't expect much in life because this is what you've been dealt, but yet your parents kept pushing you, and I think that motivation, and then obviously seeing your worth in who God created you to be, you're in Bible college.
Right,
Uh, Explain that. Like that right there is a miracle in and of itself. But the whole fact that you're in Bible college, that's not a, if you will, allow me to say, kind of special ed school. You're in a
right.
real university, real college, um, pursuing a degree that is, for being a youth pastor. What was
Yeah.
that? Tell me about that.
Well, back up a little bit because I went, like you saying, the people or the teachers in the special ed school, would say, you know, I mean, they didn't say that to me, but I did have a meeting where I was at, right before graduation, and they, I was, it was with my high school history teacher, and they asked, it was like a group of people, like, I don't know the whole thing now, but they had asked, him, hey, do you think that Dorsey will be able to make it in college? And he said, no, I don't think that Dorsey will be able to make it in college. I don't, something to the effect of, I don't think he has the ability to make it in college. And
A,
then
te-
they
a
asked
teacher
me,
a teacher said this to you.
hmm?
Now, what were your grades? I mean, you were doing fairly well, I would think, right? I mean, for
Ah,
most of us just blew off school. I mean, I was, my dad always joked when I went into teaching. He says, "How can you give students homework when you never brought a book home and you just barely made it?" Because school was boring. You didn't want to go to school, but
I was probably doing probably mixed C's,
yeah, yeah,
maybe low B's at times.
yeah.
I
But
mean,
to have
got,
to have a teacher tell you that,
yeah,
like, I'll never forget. I'm just gonna say, I think that's one of the most I don't know if damning comments that someone can make to somebody, if that makes a word, but that's very demeaning. What everybody has an opportunity to excel somewhere. I remember I was in IEP meetings when I started teaching. In fact, they stopped
well, that's exactly what it
yeah,
was. It was an IEP meeting,
they stopped inviting me to IEP meetings because they would go around the table because they bring teachers in from all the subjects that can come in,
right? Yep,
and you talk about a kid. And I had a kid on a behavioral IEP. The mom wanted to take him off of the behavioral IEP because he was going to be a senior. And she said, the real world doesn't do this. And I don't want my son to be trapped to where he can't allow himself to be with the rest of society. And that was a behavioral IEP. And, there's some emotional issues there, I'm sure. But they went around the table. And the math teacher said, "Well, your son is such a jerk." Da, 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 da. And then went to the English teacher. "Your son is this, that, and the other thing." Went around, came to me, and I literally said, "I have no clue who you people are talking about because this kid has A minus in my class. He has been phenomenal with any behavioral issues that jump up in my class, and he'll shut them down sometimes before I said, he is a wonderful student." They didn't know how to respond. I'm just thinking, maybe you need to treat him like a human being instead of like, well, he's got an IEP, therefore he's tagged. I'm really surprised, and I'm really uh, heart wrenched that a history teacher, especially a history teacher, since I'm a history teacher, but that a teacher would say that. Even if it were true, you don't say that.
right.
What's you need to offer hope. Maybe your son might have some challenges in life, but if he keeps putting his nose to the grind and keeps trying, he'll be able to do anything. And I believe that in anybody. It doesn't matter what disability you have, or where you're at. If you're willing to try, that's why I think failure is a great thing. A lot we're trained in this society. You can't fail. Failure's bad. You can't be offended. If you're offended, oh my gosh, you fail. The reality is failures. That's what makes us better. I mean, look at how many times Thomas Edison failed. You know, um, failure makes us better. So I think, what that person should have said is that maybe you might have some challenges based off of whatever challenges, academic challenges you may have been having in a school, but if you put your mind to it, you can do this. And, I'm so sorry you had to hear that from an educator, because I think that is wrong in any circumstance. But anyway, we'll let you get back to continuing your story there.
So, they came to me and they said, "What do you think?" I said, "Well, I think I can make it." And then they went to my mom, and she's sitting right there, and they asked her basically the same question, and she said, "If he thinks he can make it, he will." And I applied to several different colleges, and I ended up going to Queensboro Community College. And I was having a meeting, not a meeting, but having a discussion with my mom one day. She was in the kitchen, and I said to my mom, "How long do you think um it will take me to finish college?" And she said, "I don't care if it takes you 9 years as long as you finish." And or 10 years, something like that. And so I went on, the community college. And the first couple of weeks, were very difficult, for me. New environment, going from a school of, maybe 800 kids, all throughout, throughout the whole school,
Mm-hmm.
100 kids throughout the whole school, knowing every teacher basically by name,
Mm-hmm.
to a school of a couple thousand students, a couple hundred teachers where you don't know anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And, and I even had a meeting with my mom. I said, "Do you think I should quit, or I should, look for something else because I wasn't doing well? Come home and, be sick at night and, be whatever, and not feeling well." And she said, "Take it a few more weeks and see what happens." And I realized that they had a Chi Alpha Christian club on that campus. And I went to that meeting, and from the first time, physically, not maybe not educationally, but physically, from the first time I went to that meeting till 4 years later when I graduated, I did not have any more of the physical sicknesses that I had before going to that meeting.
Amen.
And I met Kevin Bateman, who you probably know or
Mm-hmm.
know the name of.
Yep.
That's where I met him. And um, that's where I met him, and
Hmm.
we bonded with
Yeah.
friendship and everything.
Yeah.
And it took me 4 years to do that. School years again. I failed some classes, had to retake some classes, whatnot. And even after 4 years of Bible college, excuse me, community college, because I felt again, I back in youth group, as I started to grow up, I started to feel, what I felt was a call of God on my life to go into ministry
Mm-hmm.
and to become a youth pastor. And I even had this one guy, one youth leader say to me, "Dorsey, I see you, on stage, traveling around on stage sharing your story."
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I was like, "Oh, thank you very much. That's very nice of you."
Yeah.
Because growing up, I mean, now you may not hear it, as bad as it was back, 30 years ago, but I had a speech impediment, and, when somebody tells you, "Oh, I see you traveling around, you're 17, 18 years old," and somebody says to you, "Oh, I see you traveling around sharing your story," you're probably thinking to yourself, "This guy's crazy," But for the last 16 years, that's what I've been doing.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
going back to the Bible college, even after community college, I felt like that's what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I basically followed Kevin Bateman, and went on to what is now the University of Valley Forge to study youth ministry.
Yeah. Yeah. As a when you were at the community college, did any of your teachers like connect with you and say, "Hey, what can I do to help you get through this course so that I can help meet you where you're at?" Because
Right.
I think, I do that when I teach at universities. I always will say at the beginning of the class, if any of you obviously have an ADA, the form, you let me know.
Yeah.
If you don't and there's anything that you need that I can help you to get through this class, then that's what I want to do. My goal as an educator isn't to, just give you a test, and if you fail the test, then you failed my class because you know nothing.
Right.
I give a variety of different things to gauge knowledge, but the reality is, I want you to just be competent in what you're studying. I want you to know the big ideas, so that when you get out of like an American history class, especially if you're getting out of an American history class and going to go be a preacher, that you don't say something that's not factually true. Uh,
Right.
you know, so I always try to work with each and individual student independently, and I know that professors, when you're at a university, when there's 500 people in your class or 100 people in your class, you don't want to do that. But the reality is, if you want to be an effective educator or an effective person in somebody's life, that's what you need to do. I mean, we
Yeah.
have our whole education system from K clear up through at least, all the way up is a broken system, and we do it all wrong. Because the idea is we're trying to measure ourselves against the test instead of measuring ourselves against somebody's ability to be competent in whatever career or path that they plan to go in. And I mean, we've got a lot of pastors out there that are incompetent. There's no doubt about it, because they just kind of did what they wanted to do, and have had people in their lives that kind of maybe didn't impress upon them the importance of self discipline, and let's walk the journey together.
Right.
Um, when you got to Bible college, what was that like?
Again, it was difficult. I mean, thankfully I had Kevin and I had there was another girl, Stacy Baez. I think she was at the college at the same time. So I knew a couple of people on campus, so that was, a little help, a little comfort there, knowing, that I knew a few people. And again, in both colleges, I didn't really, I met a lot of people. I didn't really have a lot of pushback with people. I didn't have a lot of pushback with people, ignoring me or people making fun of me. Even at the community college, I had, there was a group. I think it was for sorry, I think it was some type of special education part of it, where I can go there for extra help,
Mm-hmm.
or for, if I needed extra help on the test or
Yeah.
extra time on the test, I can go to them and say, "Hey, I need this. Can you help me with this?"
Right. Right.
But
Yeah.
going, and again, like like you were saying, I didn't get a lot of, even in, well, really in both colleges, I didn't really get a lot of teachers saying to me, "Hey, how can we help you?"
Mm-hmm.
Obviously in the Bible college setting, they may have, you may have gotten somebody to say, "Hey, how can I help you in your spiritual walk?"
Mm-hmm.
But maybe not in the sense of, "Hey, how can I help you better with this class?"
Yeah, they're all focused on the spiritual, but we told, oh well, it's academic, you should just do it, right? Nobody sits and takes the time to say, how can we help you also in the academic? I get that. So you've over the last so you graduate Bible college, and over the
Right?
last several years, you have been traveling to churches and places, and what do you do?
I travel and I speak, and mostly if it's the first time that I go there, it's sharing my story,
Hmm.
sharing my story of what God has done in my life, just like I am, doing with you. I pray about it and pick a certain passage of the Bible and share on that. Usually, it's a very, very encouraging, very inspirational message.
Hmm. Great, great. And you've written a book
I have.
called Overcomer: Discovering God's Plan Against All Odds, and talking about your journey. Again, when the doctors come to tell your parents, don't think he's going to survive. You might just want to sign him off and put, and they say, no, we're gonna trust God here, and we're gonna take it to the next step. And then you go through school, and you graduate at two colleges, and you write a book. I mean, this is a stamp in the face of society's verdict of defeat that they gave you when you were born.
Right.
I mean,
Absolutely.
that says a lot about who God is, what God can do, and I mean, if he can do this in you, he can do this in anybody.
Right.
This is just amazing, Dorsey. I am just I've been following you over the last several years. I've been trying to I battled with having this whole podcast for about 2, 3 years until the people kept telling me you need to just do it, because there's such an opportunity. We have podcasts out there that just talk about themselves. We have podcasts out there that tear down other ministers and other people, and I just want to have a podcast that talks about life, you know, looking at life through a biblical worldview, looking at what God can do and what God does to help us to continue to be on this journey as disciples of Jesus Christ. Because the reality is, we're all going to fail. You said it. You said it great at the beginning. We live in a fallen world. We can't escape the fallenness of this world. So things happen that are out of the control of what we would consider normal, but God still has a way. God still has a purpose for what he does and what he creates. And it seems to me that your purpose is to share what God has done, and that there is a God who continues to work and chip away at that masterpiece and that workmanship of who you are, to keep uh, digging in and drawing closer to him so that you can become who he's called you to be. I mean, this is
Right.
this is a great story. I encourage you, if you haven't had Dorsey at your ministry, at your church, at your event, that you go and connect with him at dorseyrossministries.com. And if you need to, I would recommend getting his book that tells the story. But this is a great opportunity for those of you who are listening, to bring Dorsey in to an event and to share what God has done in his life and is doing through his life even now, and encourage those. We had a couple weeks ago, we had on the show Jen and Joe Butler. I don't know if
Okay.
you remember
Oh yeah.
them. They might have
Yep.
been there toward the tail end, I think, of when we were there, because then I ended up staying there and working in the mailroom for a couple of years where I went back for education. And they've started uh, ability tree, and they have these places around the country. But they were talking about the need for people to be aware of disabilities, and be willing to embrace that within our churches. And a lot of churches don't. A lot of churches just, okay, we push you over here, but the reality is, people with disabilities are just as human as me,
Right.
just as human as the next person. Um, and we need to be able to be a place that welcomes, so that we can share the love and the message of Christ to everybody. And it's just interesting that, like I said, I've been following you, and I've been seeing your posts on Facebook, and I'm very encouraged, because you had a life that, when you uh, started out your journey, all of the voices that should have encouraged you, why not try this? Go ahead. The only two voices of stability you had were your parents. All of the other voices that should have spoken life into you and encouragement into you did just the opposite.
Yeah.
And I find it a kind of a, this paradox, because here's what they're telling you're not going to be able to do, but here's what God says and what God does with your life, and it totally debunks all of that. And I think that is a amazing message of hope, and the hope that Christ has in our lives, and the hope that God has in our lives, and what God can do in and through us. And I
Right.
hope that the people who are listening today catch that, because that's the important part. our journey as disciples of Christ are going to have our mountains and our valleys. We're going to fail every day. I fail every day. I'm no perfect person, and I don't ever want to pitch the line, and I never pitch the line that I'm perfect.
Sure.
Sometimes I'll screw it up, and my family will say, "So this show you're doing, you know, hey, I'm not perfect." And that's the reality. But God can take the imperfection of who I am and make that masterpiece for what he wants to do for his kingdom's purposes. And I think that is so important. Dorsey, do you have any closing thoughts, anything you'd like to leave with our listeners today? Encouragement that you'd like to leave with them, that as they're sitting here and they've listened to this interview, as to how they can better their life as a disciple of Christ?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you, Mike, for having me on the show. I greatly appreciate it. And also to check out my podcast, the Dorsey Ross Show, as well. And I would just say, for those that are listening to, if you, regardless if you're down or if you feel up, keep going, keep pushing forward. My friend of mine I had on a while back, and she would tell me, her saying is, today's the best day ever, and that's true. Today is the best day ever because we don't know. Yesterday's gone, and tomorrow we don't know what's going to happen. But yet, even though that's a great saying, we still need to, keep pushing forward. We still need to keep moving forward, regardless of the obstacles that are in front of us, regardless of the obstacles that may come, may hinder us.
Right. I mean,
Regardless.
Scripture even tells us to be anxious for nothing because tomorrow has enough worries of its own.
Right.
We don't need to worry about that. And like that, I have a buddy who says the best is yet to come. He always says the best is yet
Right.
to come.
Yeah.
Live your moment as this is the divine moment, the right now. And what can you do to encourage yourself to keep going and living for Christ? I mean, that's the reality. When all life fails and things seem hopeless, there is still a hope in Jesus Christ.
Amen.
Well, Dorsey, it was an honor to have you on the show today. I am looking forward to putting this video up here, and going through and making it available. But I just want to encourage you, as the listeners, as you are watching this, again, continue to live your life as a disciple of Jesus Christ, doing the best you can to strive to be holy as he is holy. But one of the things we want to make sure we do is we don't give up hope. We don't let the enemy have the foothold in our lives to give up hope. And what others may say we can't do, God says we can. And if he says we can do all things through Christ. Amen. Amen. Well, Mike Beckett here for the host of Dead Prophet. We'll see you next time on the show. Have a great day. Bye-bye. Oh, is it time?